Welcome to this bite-sized, memorable look at the world around us. I'm Jim from Nature's Work. This window on nature is taking a closer look at ferns. What we'll cover is an introduction to ferns, what are the identifying features we can look for while out in the field, and also some of the notable species that you might find in and around the outdoors in the UK. So what are ferns? Ferns are members of a group of vascular plants known as pteridophytes. And in the UK, there are 4 groups of ferns and what we know as their fern allies making up the pteridophytes. These include the horsetails, which are the closest relatives of the ferns. Then there's quillworts and club mosses, which are the most distantly related. And all ferns and pteridophytes differ from flowering plants in that they're reproduced by minute spores, which are produced in spore capsules. So they're quite similar to mosses, but they're unlike flowers, which develop seeds through their flowers. So they're spore-bearing plants. And we know all of the spore-bearing plants as lower plants, or they're referred to as lower plants. Ferns, pretty charming plants, and they're often admired, and they're found in garden centres and houses. The beautiful patterns and regular branching that they've got. They all have distinct roots, stems, and leaf-like fronds, they're known as. And they have this vascular system, which means they have the ability to transport water and minerals throughout their body. And in the world today, there are about 12,000 species of fern. Most of them are tropical. And they've descended from an ancient group that originated in the late Devonian era about 350 million years ago, which is more than 200 million years before the first flowering plants arrived. Their leaves are known as fronds, and they have a midrib, and sometimes the frond is undivided or uncut and is described as being simple, as with the hart's tongue fern here. If the leaf blade is divided or cut to the midrib, it's known as once pinnate or simply pinnate. And the example here is maidenhair spleenwort. And the leaflets there are known as pinnae. But if these leaflets or pinnae are divided right to the pinna stalk, then they're known as bipinnate or two-pinnate. And the example we've got here is the mountain male fern. So there's the diagram to just illustrate. And each sub-pinnae leaflet is known as that pinnule. And if these pinnules are subdivided even further, then we describe them as being tripinnate. And these tiny little subdivided leaflets are known as segments. An example there we have is buckler fern. So I mentioned earlier that ferns produce via spores, which are formed in structures called sporangia. And these, you often see them on the underside of the leaves or at the tip of the fronds, and they aggregate into these structures called sori. So a few more examples here of some of the shapes and colours and patterns and designs of these spore-bearing structures, these sori. And you can see they're very diverse, variable, and they're very useful to help us in the identification of each of the different ferns. But there are exceptions. Some ferns produce 2 types of leaf or frond, ones which are sterile and those which are fertile. And the fertile ones bear the spore capsules. So you've got the 2 different fronds in moonwort there. And in parsley fern, there's a broad leaf and then a narrow leaf. And then hard fern again has 2 different leaves, and one's sterile and one's fertile. The plant that we see bears these spores, and we know it as a sporophyte. But the life cycle of ferns is quite complicated, and it has what we see as one of 2 phases of its life cycle, and it's a spore-bearing phase, known as the sporophyte. Within the sporangia, the spores develop through a special type of cell division known as meiosis. these spores develop into a gametophyte, and on the structure of this gametophyte, there are egg-producing cells and structures and sperm-producing antheridium, and the sperm swim to the egg. There's a fertilization process that happens, forming a zygote, which then develops into a young sporophyte, which develops into the plant that we know, the mature sporophyte. So that's the complete life cycle. And it's to get your head around what's going on really, if you consider the life cycle of a butterfly, whereas a caterpillar is an individual of that species, just as the adult butterfly form is as well. So they have these two changing forms. So we're going to have a look at 5 different ferns that we're going to see in and around the UK. And the moonwort is quite a magical looking fern. It's only 2 or 3 inches tall, so very, very hard to spot. But it's in open grasslands and usually on alkaline soils. And they have their pinnate lobes, which are like half moons, which is where it gets its name from. And it belongs to an ancient group which has evolved independently from the other ferns, and it's grown independently for about 300 million years. So it's quite distinct and separate in a taxonomic way to say bracken fern. So you've got these 2 different fronds, one sterile and one fertile. And the more enclosed one, the smaller one, bears they have clusters of spores. So as I mentioned, they like alkaline soils. So you might find them on sand dunes and quarries, sometimes open woodlands and well-drained meadows. You can see them with a good eye. You can hone your eye in, but because they're so small and green, they're very easy to overlook. But you're more likely to see them in northern Britain, in Scotland, in Wales, as well as northwest England. A fairly common and obvious fern that you find in the mountains and also across the Alps is this medium-sized bushy fern with its leaves which resemble parsley, hence its name, parsley fern. Don't confuse it with an edible plant though. I wouldn't eat this one. It's widespread but not overly common in the British mountains, except in Snowdonia and the Lake District. And again, you have these 2 different types of fronds, one sterile and one fertile, and the broader ones are sterile. So on the fertile ones, the narrow ones, if you look at the back of those in the autumn, you'll see the dark brown spores in the spore cases. Hard fern. The main large fronds are like a herringbone kind of shape, and they're dark and leathery in appearance and glossy. But if you get them in exposed sunny places, they can turn more yellowish. Again, you've got the 2 different shaped fronds. You can see just appeared the fertile frond with the brown sori and the capsules, the sporangia. And as the ferns unfurl in the springtime, they're known as crosier or fiddleheads as well. So that's quite a common term to use with all developing ferns in the spring. So where will you find hard fern? It's common in the west and north of Britain, acidic conditions, so acidic grasslands, open hillsides, and in woodlands, so damp, more mountainousy and woodland environments. Hart's tongue fern is a medium-sized fern with undivided strap-like leathery fronds. And you'll find them in shaded and damp woodlands across the UK. And the blades and the fronds can be up to 2 feet or more in length. When you find them in exposed sunny places, they're maybe much more stunted, and they're maybe only 2 or 3 inches tall. You can also find them on mortared walls as well, so they like the calcium from the cement. And the spores are produced in these long parallel sori on the undersurface of the fronds. Finally, we'll have a look at bracken. People often say, is bracken a fern? And what type of fern is bracken? But it is one of the ferns that we have in the UK. It's one of the most common plants across the world, and it's found on all continents except Antarctica. It's also Britain's largest native fern. Grows in woodlands, but as you can see in this image, it prefers open, dry ground and open, sunny areas, and exposed grasslands and not into heathlands. Importantly, it has to be dry. It doesn't like boggy ground at all. The fronds unfurl from the base, and you get these beautiful croziers developing in the spring. And as you can see, it's developing there. In the autumn, these fronds turn a beautiful golden brown colour, so a whole hillside can change appearance with the presence of bracken. And they do spread rapidly through underground stems known as rhizomes. And the rhizomes they can go as deep as 1 metre, so they need deep soil and also dry soil to find bracken. And they can travel over several hundred metres, these rhizomes. So that's one of the reasons why it's such an effective spreading plant. If you'd like to know more, why not join one of my courses? If you prefer to guide yourself, then I have a superb range of flower cards created as playing cards and top trumps designed to make learning fun. Please press like if you've enjoyed this presentation. Feel free to write any comments. See you next time for more windows on nature.